Hi, my name is Chris, and this video is called Dealing with Anxiety-Provoking Thoughts and Fantasies. And this video relates to A Course in Miracles. We're too emotionally involved in our lives in experiencing the world around us to be able to rationalize away our suffering and problems as if they were some sort of fantasy. When things happen to us that upset us, that feeling of upset makes the experience feel real to us, and part of the seeming reality of the experience that we have is that it makes us feel horrible. The more fear, anger, and powerlessness we feel, the more real the experience seems to be and the more undeniable it seems to be. But these are simply states of feelings. The scene that we see around us in the world, whatever they may be, is simply a stage setting. It's a means to evoke emotion in us. Our mind is creating what we see. Every scene is a setup to evoke in us certain feelings because we're thinking certain things. And false thoughts, such as the idea of there being a physical world, will evoke within us upset emotions. And those upset emotions, in turn, will be expressed through a setup process where our seemingly external reality has certain events, and those events evoke in us certain feelings. Everything that happens is to evoke in us certain feelings, and those emotions, in turn, are expressions of the thoughts that we are thinking. So as we work through guilt thoughts, we have guilt-based emotions, in other words, painful emotions. And these painful emotions happen when emotionally upsetting circumstances happen to us. So the circumstances are really secondary. What is primary is that our mind wants to express these upset feelings based on the negative thoughts that we're thinking, such as a belief in the physical world. Now, when we engage in fearful fantasy, when we have fantasies that cause us anxiety, we're thinking about a future event in a negative light, imagining things go wrong or even terribly wrong. Then we feel fear, anguish, powerlessness, and so on that comes with that imagined event. What we're not consciously aware of that we're doing is that we're protecting our condemnation of other people or ourselves in the process. The fantasy, in other words, is like a band-aid. It makes us think about how terribly scared we feel and how horrible everything is in the fantasy. But in actuality, what we're really doing is protecting guilt, either the condemnation we have for other people or the blame we've placed upon ourselves. We're saying that we're not ready to forgive, and so we create this upsetting scenario to, in some way, make that guilt more real. We're reinforcing, in other words, the guilt of other people or ourselves in the scene so that we don't have to forgive. We're not consciously aware of doing this, but subconsciously we're doing this. We want to continue to blame them and to protect ourselves from forgiving them. The imagined events that we see gain credibility in our eyes also because we see them as extensions of our present situation, as part of a realistic possible future situation. However, our current situation is not real, and therefore it cannot really reinforce the reality of future events, because those too are also imagined. The upset and pain that we are feeling about this fantasy is guilt. Every painful emotion is guilt, and every physical pain is also guilt. All pain is guilt, regardless of the form, and all guilt is tied either to the condemnation of others or ourselves. Guilt in our thinking is the problem. In fact, it is the only problem that we have, and the only solution is guiltlessness. So let's try a quick exercise to deal with this frightening fantasy that we're dealing with. Let's take the negative fantasy and re-enter it. I want you to relive this fantasy from the beginning. However, after a few seconds in the fantasy, when the events get started, I want you to freeze frame it, stop the action that's occurring, and place Jesus in the scene. Regardless of what's going on, place him there in the fantasy. Make him completely real as you are and other people are. Make him solid, and make him shine with light. In other words, he has a shining aura of light. This light represents his guiltlessness. Simply stop what you're doing in the middle of this fantasy and look at Jesus carefully. He is here to demonstrate perfect guiltlessness. What that means is, as you look at him, you will see that not only is he guiltless, but he's also teaching you that you are guiltless. He is also teaching you that other people that you know are guiltless as well, regardless of whether you consider them to be good or evil. Jesus is not asking you to forgive the people around you in a traditional sense, to overlook what they have done, but rather he is asking you to be willing to see things differently. He asks you to say, okay, I've had this bad experience. The person did what they did, and it's undeniable. But I am willing to understand the situation differently, to see and interpret it differently. That's all he's asking of you. He doesn't ask you to immediately have some new understanding, nor is he asking you to turn the other cheek exactly. Rather, he's asking you to forgive in the sense that what appears to have been done to you was not actually done to you as you think it was, but rather it was like a dream where you misinterpreted what was actually happening. Look at him carefully, examine his guiltlessness, and then tell him that you are willing to see other people differently, to see yourself differently, to see life differently, and that you want to heal so that you can heal others, just as he is healing you. Tell him that you're willing to do this, that you're willing to see things differently. Especially bring up the specific names of people who are related to your anxiety, and mention that you are willing to see them differently. When you feel tempted to turn back to your anxious thoughts and your fearful fantasy, simply turn back to him again and gaze more deeply into his perfect guiltlessness. Ask yourself, do I wish to possess this perfect guiltlessness for myself? If the answer is yes, then you'll be willing to give up your previous interpretations of what you have experienced in the past and to see things differently. Jesus has never sinned, nor has he been sinned against. He is free from guilt because he has seen things differently, not because the events of his past have been wiped away. He isn't asking you to have faith in him, only to have willingness to see things differently in the future. He's not even asking you to understand what that different way of seeing will be. He's simply asking for willingness right now. Now you may notice, having done this, that your fantasy has ceased to cause you emotional harm. You're feeling better and calmer. Stay with Jesus in this scene as long as you need to in order to achieve that, until you feel calm and at peace. Then repeat this process with all your most fearful fantasies that you're currently dealing with. The problem with fear is that it tends to reinforce all of the most untrue aspects of our seeing, meaning every delusion that we are clinging to is strengthened by fear. It causes us to distrust other people, to flee from other people, to hate, to judge ourselves, to feel guilty, to harm ourselves, to harm others, to act violently in a self-defensive manner when it's not necessary against perceived threats rather than reacting non-violently and peacefully. And it strengthens the illusion at every level. Jesus is not in our fantasy as a statement about our failures as a person, and he is not there to redeem us as some sort of filthy sinner. Rather, he is here to demonstrate that despite all that we have done and all that has been done to us, that we are neither the victim nor the victimizer in reality, but something completely different. We are the dreamer of our world and the author of our own experience, and that for too long, guilt has been authoring our experience for us. Guilt is entirely foreign to us and alien to our being. Guilt is the outsider and will always be the outsider. And when we identify with guilt, then we split our identity against itself and treat some part of our own identity as the enemy, evaluating it, examining it, disapproving it, judging it, and attacking it. In other words, it's no longer who we are. So guilt is a split in the identity which leads to self-alienation. And guilt, in the sense that we perceive it in others, also leads to a split within ourselves. As we see undesirable qualities within ourselves, we split them away and create a rift in our own consciousness, increasingly dividing ourselves against ourselves. So in review, insert Jesus in any frightening fantasy that you may have. Gaze upon him and see his guiltlessness. Examine it carefully and accept it for yourself and for the other people in your life. Acknowledge that you're willing to change how you see things. Even the worst people in the world are sinless because, although they have done horrible, evil things, they themselves do not possess the free will to behave differently. They do not have the means to escape their own behavior and become something better. They simply are who they are in that moment, reacting to life as they see it, in the only way that they're capable of reacting to it. They have reacted to life since birth, and have reacted in the only way that they can. They possess no free will. Without free will, there is no evil, because the person is not doing what they do out of a desire for evil, but merely because they believe that this is their best reaction to what they see. They have simply misunderstood the situation as they see it, and have come to the wrong conclusion about how to react to it. But this is a delusion. It does not make them guilty. They are incapable of doing anything other than what they do. And judging and hating them is meaningless, since they themselves do not possess the free will to escape their own behavior. Your journey is done when you look at the sinlessness of Jesus and know that it is exactly the same as your own, and when you look upon others and see that same sinlessness in them as well. You attain this not through purity of good deeds exactly, but through understanding your own guiltlessness and embracing it and wanting it. When you possess this guiltlessness, you will by default see it in everyone else. Nothing that appears to have happened has actually happened as it appears to. It is all an illusion. Your life is a fiction like a movie that you have become caught up in and believed in. It is not reality and it is not real. It happened because you were thinking about guilt in an attempt to understand guilt, and because you thought about guilt, you had guilty thoughts and guilty feelings. When your interest in guilt is exhausted, you will leave it behind. The final step to this is to consciously accept guiltlessness as a frame of reference, to live in a state of guiltlessness. You get fed up with guilt and you return to peace. Peace means seeing guiltlessness, sinlessness in everyone. What remains after that is simply your subconscious mind working out its remaining attachments to guilt, until you pass from the world and return to peace in heaven. I hope that this video was helpful for you. Thank you for listening. Take care.